Most people thought Margaret Clark had everything a woman could ever want. She owned sprawling ranches in Texas, fleets of sleek cars, beachfront villas in Malibu, and an empire of luxury hotels stretching from California to Florida. Yet on that quiet autumn morning, as golden sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of her grand bedroom, Margaret sat alone, staring at an old family portrait resting on her mahogany dresser. Her strong, elegant hands trembled slightly as she reached for it. She saw herself standing tall in the center, surrounded by her husband Thomas, and their 4 children Jessica, Brian, Rebecca, and Ethan, all smiling for the camera at some forgotten Thanksgiving gathering years ago. But today the smiles felt distant. The mansion felt colder than ever. With a weary sigh, Margaret set the photo back down and whispered under her breath, "Who truly loves me in this house? If I was weak, if I was dying, who would stay by my side?" For the first time in decades, fear flickered behind her composed blue eyes. That morning she called her trusted attorney, Mrs. Joanne Myers, and her longtime family physician, Dr. Elizabeth Carter, into her study. As they sat across from her massive oak desk, Margaret leaned forward, her voice unsteady, yet resolute. "I want to pretend that I'm gravely ill," she said softly. "I need to know who in my family actually cares for me when I'm helpless." Neither Joanne nor Dr. Carter spoke for a long moment. Outside, the towering oaks swayed in the breeze, their leaves whispering secrets that Margaret Clark was finally ready to uncover. Attorney Joanne Myers cleared her throat first, adjusting her pearl earrings as she studied Margaret with quiet concern. "That's a wise idea, ma'am," she finally said in her calm, legal tone. "But if you're going to test them, you should protect yourself. You'll set up a new private account today and move half of your assets there. That way, if any of them are just pretending to care, they won't find everything." Margaret felt the corners of her mouth lift into a faint smile. Joanne had always been sharp and loyal, a rare combination. "Thank you," she murmured. Dr. Elizabeth Carter, a dignified woman in her 50s with silver strands streaking her chestnut hair, nodded solemnly. "I will tell your family you have advanced pancreatic cancer, with only 6 months left. I'll act my part carefully. They'll believe it." Her voice trembled just slightly at the cruelty of the charade, but her eyes remained steady. Margaret felt her chest tighten as the words sank in 6 months left. Even though it was pretend, the finality of the phrase sent a chill down her spine. The next morning, the Clark mansion awoke to sounds that hadn't been heard before. Deep, ragged coughing echoing through the hallways, muffled groans from behind Margaret's heavy oak doors. She stayed in bed under her thick quilt, refusing to touch the breakfast tray her butler brought. When Thomas, her husband of 30 years, knocked gently and entered, he was startled to see her pale and frail, propped up by pillows, her eyes half closed. Soon their children gathered in her room. Jessica, the eldest daughter in her tailored navy suit, placed her hand on her mother's shoulder with tears brimming. Brian, wearing his college football hoodie, hovered awkwardly by the window. Rebecca gasped and burst into sobs, while Ethan shifted from foot to foot, nervously glancing at his phone. Dr. Carter arrived mid-morning carrying her leather medical bag. After a thorough examination in front of the family, she exhaled deeply, removed her glasses, and declared, "I'm so sorry. Your mother is very sick. She has pancreatic cancer. She may not live longer than 6 months." The words fell over them like heavy snow, silent and suffocating, as Margaret watched each reaction with a heart already breaking at what she feared she might soon discover. For the first few days after Dr. Carter's grave announcement, the Clark mansion transformed into a house of whispered prayers and hushed footfalls. Jessica sat beside her mother's bed every morning, reading devotionals aloud from a small, leather-bound book. Brian, though awkward, brought her fresh orange juice and fluffed her pillows, mumbling, "Here you go, Mom," before darting out of the room to avoid her weary eyes. Rebecca, her mascara smudged from constant tears, stroked Margaret's hand and whispered over and over, "Don't leave me, Mama. Please." Even Ethan, usually glued to his phone or gaming console, hovered near the door, his dark eyes troubled beneath his shaggy hair. Thomas, her husband, remained by her side late into the evenings, his hand resting gently over hers. "We'll get through this," he whispered, though his voice cracked with a fear he didn't dare show. Margaret saw in their worried eyes a flicker of what she longed to find: love beyond inheritance, care beyond comfort. For a brief moment, hope flickered within her chest. But by the second week, the atmosphere shifted. Jessica began arriving late and leaving early, claiming urgent meetings with clients she couldn't reschedule. "He'll come back tonight, Mom," she said one morning, kissing Margaret's cheek quickly before grabbing her designer purse. Brian announced he had to return to college early to prepare for finals, though he promised to FaceTime every day, which soon dwindled to a single text that read, "Hope we're okay, love you." Rebecca stopped spending hours in the room telling Dr. Carter and Thomas that she simply couldn't bear to watch her mother suffer. Instead, she spent her afternoons shopping online boxes, arriving at the mansion, daily silk dresses, pearl earrings, luxury skincare. Ethan retreated back to his gaming chair, only appearing at meals, glancing at Margaret with silent discomfort before focusing on his phone, And Thomas, the husband she had once trusted with every beat of her heart, he too began to withdraw. "I can't watch you like this, Margaret," he whispered one evening, standing in the doorway with tears brimming. "He'll check on you later," he added. But later never came. As Margaret lay alone under the weight of thick quilts in her vast master bedroom, she gazed at the white crown molding above, fighting back tears. The crystal chandelier above her blurred into watery prisms of light. Each day revealed the truth she feared most. One by one, the people she had loved and sacrificed for began to disappear, each consumed by their own fears, their own desires, their own plans for her fortune. But hidden among them all was one soul who never left her side. And as the days passed, Margaret's eyes searched the room with both sorrow and quiet gratitude for that steadfast presence she prayed she would never lose. Among all who drifted in and out of Margaret's quiet room, only one remained anchored at her bedside, like an unbreakable mooring line: Ethan. The youngest of her children, once quiet and withdrawn, emerged as her lone comfort during those hollow weeks. He woke early each morning before the mansion staff arrived, padding barefoot down the long carpeted hallway with a small tray in his hands, warm oatmeal with cinnamon, her favorite peppermint tea, and sometimes a folded napkin with a cheerful note scribbled in blue ink. "Hang in there, Mom. Love you more than you know." When Margaret's coughing fits grew harsher, rattling through her chest like broken branches in a storm, Ethan sat on the edge of her bed, rubbing her back gently with a trembling hand. "It's okay, Mama," he whispered, his voice cracking. "I'm right here. I'm not going anywhere." In the quiet afternoons, he read aloud from her favorite novels, his soft baritone filling the silent, lonely corners of her room with warmth. At dusk, he lit her lavender candle on the dresser, whispering a little prayer that its calming scent would ease her restlessness. And at night, when the mansion fell silent except for the chirping crickets outside the open window, he lay curled on the plush carpet beside her bed, wrapped in a thin blanket, snoring softly like a child again. Sometimes Margaret woke in the middle of the night, sweat gathering at her hairline, fear clawing at her chest. She would glance down and see Ethan's sleeping form, his chest rising and falling steadily, one hand clutching her blanket as if anchoring himself to her presence. Tears would fill her eyes, not out of sorrow, but of aching love. He was the youngest, the quietest, the one they all thought was distracted and indifferent. Yet he is the only one who sees me now, she thought, brushing his dark hair from his forehead as he slept. One evening, as the sunset spilled golden light across her cream bedroom walls, Ethan grasped her frail hand, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. "Mama," he whispered, his voice shaking. "When you get better, we're gonna go fishing at Grand Lake, okay? Just like old times. He'll even bait the hook for you." Margaret smiled weakly, her vision blurred with tears. In that fleeting moment, despite the sorrow of her family's betrayal, she felt an unexpected peace bloom in her weary chest. For though her world was collapsing around her, though love, she had trusted, proved shallow, the quiet strength of one child's devotion reminded her that she had not lived in vain. And for the first time in many weeks, as darkness fell beyond the windows, Margaret drifted to sleep, with a soft smile on her lips, her trembling fingers still entwined with Ethan's warm, steadfast grip. But while Ethan remained her steadfast comfort, the rest of the Clark household descended into silent chaos. One afternoon, as golden light filtered through the mansion's sweeping windows, Margaret lay half asleep, her breathing ragged, when muffled voices drifted in from her study down the hall. Jessica was in there, her sharp heels clicking against the marble floors as she paced, speaking into her phone with forced cheerfulness. "Yes, I'll handle the board meeting myself," she said, pausing before adding. "Mother's too weak now. It's time I take full leadership of the company." She would want that. Brian, meanwhile, returned home that weekend, not to visit her, but to rummage through her filing cabinets looking for his tuition fund paperwork, muttering under his breath about transferring to a private university out of state. Rebecca spent hours lounging on the back terrace, with friends sipping rose and scrolling through her phone, her laughter drifting up to Margaret's window like distant echoes of a life that no longer belonged to her. And Thomas, her beloved, Thomas, who once held her hand every morning before work and kissed her temple with warmth, had grown distant and cold. One evening, as Ethan helped her sip water, Margaret heard Thomas on the phone in the hallway, his voice hushed, but edged with urgency. "Yes, I'm meeting with Joanne Myers tomorrow to discuss asset restructuring. I need everything transferred before it's too late." Those words pierced her chest more deeply than the pain of her illness ever could. She closed her eyes, fighting back tears as Ethan wiped her forehead gently with a damp cloth. When she finally opened them again, she saw him watching her with worried eyes. "It's okay, Mama," he whispered, gripping her hand. "You still have me." That night, as the moonlight spilled across her bed, Margaret lay awake, listening to the distant sound of laughter and clinking glasses from the downstairs parlor. Thomas was hosting friends, celebrating some minor business victory. She felt her heart crack a little deeper as she heard him boast, "Soon enough, everything will be under my control. It's just a matter of time." Margaret turned her face to the wall, silent tears pooling in her ears. In that moment, the grand mansion around her felt colder than any winter storm. She realized that what she feared most was not dying. It was seeing the people she loved reveal hearts so small and empty. And though her body ached with weakness, her mind grew sharper with every betrayal. Let them show their true selves, she thought, feeling Ethan's sleeping hand curled around hers on the mattress edge. Soon the truth will rise, and they will see who I really am. Days turned into weeks, and as Margaret's body grew weaker, the true faces around her sharpened into cruel clarity. One morning she woke to the sound of muffled arguments outside her bedroom door. Ethan, who had fallen asleep on a chair beside her bed, jolted awake as the voices grew louder. The door swung open, and there stood Jessica, with her arms folded tightly across her chest, her expression cold and resolute. Behind her hovered Thomas, his eyes darting nervously between his daughter and his wife. Mother Jessica said, her tone clipped and businesslike, "It's time we talk about the company. Investors are growing uneasy about your health, and the board is pressuring me to take over full control. It's best if I start signing off decisions immediately." Margaret blinked, trying to focus on her daughter's rigid silhouette, as pain pulsed through her frail body. Before she could respond, Thomas stepped forward. "Jessica's right," he said softly, though his words held no warmth. "You need to rest. Let her handle everything now." Ethan rose from his chair, his young face flushed with anger. "She's not dead," he shouted, startling them all. "She's still here. She's still Mom." Jessica rolled her eyes, her perfectly manicured fingers drumming against her arm. "Don't be childish, Ethan. This is about protecting her legacy." Later that evening, as shadows deepened across the mansion, Margaret overheard Brian speaking loudly on the phone in the study, boasting to a friend about finally getting his name on the deed to one of her beachfront villas. Rebecca, draped in a new silk robe, passed her bedroom door without even glancing in, humming happily as she scrolled through vacation rentals for her upcoming trip to Bora Bora. The final blow came that night when Thomas entered her room, reeking of scotch. His tie loosened, his blue eyes bleary. He slumped into the armchair by her bed, exhaling heavily before speaking in a slow, slurred voice. "You know, it's almost a relief, Margaret. Watching you fade like this. You've always overshadowed everyone. Your strength, your power, even your love." His eyes, once filled with devotion, now carried only weary resentment. "Don't worry. He'll take good care of what's left." Margaret's breath caught in her chest, her eyes brimming as she turned her gaze toward Ethan, who stood frozen near the window, silent tears slipping down his cheeks. In that heavy, silent room, under the soft glow of her bedside lamp, the truth crystallized in Margaret's heart. They were not mourning me. They were waiting for me to vanish. Except Ethan. Dear Ethan. She reached out her trembling hand, and he rushed to her side, clutching it with desperate, childlike devotion. And in that moment, Margaret knew this was no longer just a test. It was her final lesson to them all. The next morning dawned with a harsh, glaring light streaming through Margaret's bedroom windows, illuminating the once elegant drapes now heavy with dust. She woke to the sound of footsteps shuffling into her room. Jessica entered first, her designer heels clicking against the oak floorboards, followed closely by Brian and Rebecca. Thomas trailed behind them, rubbing sleep from his bloodshot eyes. They all wore forced expressions of sorrow, but Margaret saw the calculation behind each glance. Mother Jessica began curtly straightening the pearl brooch on her silk blouse. "We've called a meeting downstairs. It's time to decide how we're going to handle everything before it's too late." Margaret's gaze drifted past her children to Ethan, standing silently near the window, with his arms crossed protectively over his chest. His eyes were red from crying through the night. She tried to speak, but her voice came out as a rasping whisper. "What meeting?" Rebecca stepped forward, her fingers tapping anxiously against her phone screen. "We're discussing which properties to sell first," she said without looking up. "No point waiting till the market drops." Brian snorted with annoyance. "Why are we even discussing this with her? She's not exactly in a decision-making state." At that, Ethan's face flushed with rage. He strode to Margaret's bedside and planted himself between her and the rest. "Leave her alone," he snapped, his voice trembling. "She's not gone yet. She's right here. You're talking like she's dead already." Jessica rolled her eyes, dismissing her brother with a cold smile. "Grow up, Ethan. We're protecting what's ours." Thomas finally spoke, his voice quiet but firm. "Enough," he said, rubbing his temples. Let's get this done before the lawyers arrive. Margaret watched them in stunned silence, her chest aching with an agony beyond illness. Tears welled in her eyes as she looked at each of their faces she had once held close. Kissed. Good night prayed for through fevered childhood nights. Now they stood before her, like scavengers circling a carcass. Only Ethan remained at her side, his hand gripping hers so tightly his knuckles turned white. "Don't worry, Mama," he whispered, leaning down so only she could hear. "They can take everything, but it'll always be yours. Always." In that moment, Margaret felt her last reserves of sorrow transform into something new, something fierce and unbreakable. Beneath her frailty burned a silent vow. They may see me as dying, but before I leave this world, they will know exactly who I am and who they have become. Later that evening, as the Clark mansion glowed with chandeliers and the scent of rosemary lamb drifted from the grand dining hall, Margaret lay quietly in her bed, her breathing ragged. The family meeting had ended with Jessica storming out in frustration, Brian cursing under his breath about lawyers, and Rebecca disappearing into her room to order more silk dresses online. Only Ethan remained by her side, wiping her forehead with a cool cloth, his eyes never leaving her face. But as the house fell silent, muffled laughter erupted downstairs, carried up through the marble stairway. Margaret's heart tightened with confusion. She listened carefully, straining her frail ears. She heard Thomas' deep voice slurring with drunken satisfaction. To the future he toasted loudly, glassware clinking. "Margaret gave us everything, and soon it'll finally be ours." Margaret's eyes filled with tears. She tried to sit up, but pain pinned her to the mattress. In that moment the heavy oak door opened quietly, and Ethan slipped back into her room with a worried frown. "They're celebrating Mama," he whispered, his voice shaking with grief. They're downstairs drinking. Jessica is calling the realtor tomorrow to start listing your penthouse. Dad's talking about selling your charity shares, too." She closed her eyes, her chest heaving with silent sobs. Every beat of her heart felt like a betrayal within her own body. For decades, she had built everything, brick by brick, deal by deal, to give her family a life of dignity and comfort. Yet in her weakest moment, her husband and children saw her not as the pillar who carried their dreams, but as an obstacle to their greed. Outside her window, the last glow of sunset faded, giving way to the quiet darkness of night. Ethan turned on her bedside lamp, casting a soft golden light across her lined face. He took her trembling hand in his own and whispered, "Don't listen to them, Mama. They don't deserve you. I promise he'll never leave you alone." Margaret's tired eyes met his, and in that moment a fierce clarity rose within her fading body. They think this is the end, but tomorrow, they will see the truth. She lay back against the pillows, her breathing shallow, but her mind sharper than it had been in weeks. Her son's unwavering devotion lit a final fire within her chest. With Ethan holding her hand tightly, Margaret fell asleep with a secret plan forming in her heart. One that would reveal to them all exactly what love, loyalty, and justice truly meant before her time ran out. The next morning dawned with a gray stillness over the Clark estate, as if even the sun hesitated to rise upon such a house. Margaret lay awake long before the household stirred, staring at the intricate patterns on her bedroom ceiling. Her chest felt heavy, her breaths shallow, but her mind pulsed with sharp clarity. She turned her head slightly toward Ethan, who had fallen asleep curled up on the upholstered bench beside her bed, his hair tousled, his lips parted in exhausted sleep. Slowly she reached for the small silver bell on her nightstand and rang it once. Within minutes, Mrs. Myers, her trusted attorney, entered the room carrying a leather folder. Her eyes softened when she saw Ethan sleeping so protectively near his mother. Closing the door behind her, she sat down at Margaret's side. "Are you ready, ma'am?" Mrs. Myers asked in a quiet voice. Margaret's eyes flickered with resolve. "It's time they see who I really am before I leave this world," she whispered. Mrs. Myers nodded, then reached into her folder, retrieving a stack of legal papers and a sleek black device. She placed it carefully on the bed beside Margaret's thin hand. "This contains all the recordings as you requested. Every conversation. Every plan they've made against you these past weeks." Margaret exhaled shakily, feeling both pain and triumph ripple through her frail body. "Gather them," she said firmly, her voice trembling with emotion. "All of them. Jessica, Brian, Rebecca, and Thomas, too. Tell them I want to see their faces one last time." 2 hours later, the family assembled in her grand bedroom, the heavy velvet curtains drawn back to reveal a gloomy sky. Jessica walked in first, exuding forced politeness, followed by Brian, who glanced around with irritation, and Rebecca, who sighed dramatically, arms folded across her silk robe. Thomas entered last, straightening his tie, nervously, his eyes darting between his wife and Mrs. Myers. Margaret lay propped up on pillows, the device resting in her lap. She scanned their faces one by one, her gaze calm yet piercing. "Sit," she ordered softly. The room fell silent as they obeyed their expressions, betraying annoyance, impatience, and faint unease. With trembling fingers, Margaret pressed play on the device. Suddenly, the room filled with the sound of their own voices. Jessica discussing how quickly she could sell the company, Brian bragging about spending her investments on his tuition upgrade, Rebecca mocking her mother's weakness, and Thomas's drunken confession that her death would be a relief. Their faces drained of color as each recording played in brutal clarity. Ethan stood at her side, his arms crossed protectively, his jaw clenched in rage. Tears streamed silently down Margaret's cheeks as she watched them shrink beneath the weight of their own betrayal. Finally, she spoke, her voice steady and unbroken, despite her frailty. "Now, you see, this isn't about my death. It's about your lives, and what you've chosen to become." The room remained silent as Margaret set the recording device down on her quilt. She gazed at her family, their eyes cast down, their pride shattered by the truth of their own words. Her voice, though faint, filled the grand chamber with quiet authority. "All my life I gave you love without asking for anything in return. But now, standing at the edge of my days, I see clearly that true love is never measured by words spoken in public or tears shed before others. It is measured by presence, by sacrifice, by loyalty shown when no one is watching." Ethan knelt beside her, pressing his forehead to her trembling hand as tears streamed down his face. Margaret closed her eyes, her heart finally at peace, knowing that while she might leave this world soon, she would depart, knowing she had one child whose soul was untouched by greed. She exhaled softly, whispering, "Love is proven in action, not intention." To everyone listening today, remember this. In the end, your kindness, loyalty, and presence will be your true legacy, not your titles, wealth, or possessions. If this story moved your heart, tell us in the comments below, who is that one person in your life who always stood by you no matter what? We read every word you share. And if you want more powerful life lessons and stories of unbreakable love and dignity, subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you never miss a moment that inspires your day.